Hey, Mike here with Canadian Musician Magazine. Um, Lately, well, some big news came through my inbox the other day, and it's been making the rounds on social media and through I guess, the industry news and everything going on. And that is that Toronto-based Coalition Music recently announced a new partnership with the Aboriginal People's Television Network, APTN, to create Red Music Rising. And why this is important, of course, is that this new label and artist services company is the first to be entirely owned, managed, and operated by Indigenous professionals and dedicated to Indigenous artists. And so I'm thrilled to have with me Matt Maw, who has been brought in to run this new company, Red Music Rising. And Matt, congrats on the company, congrats on the new gig, and how you doing, man?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, all things considered, the fact that we're in these weird, unprecedented COVID times. I
Yeah,
mean, it's an interesting time to launch a music company for sure. But
no kidding.
yeah, all things considered, I'm doing great, and thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely, man. It's my pleasure. And just before we get into Red Music Rising, the story of how it came together, what it's here to do, and everything, what's a little bit about your background? How did you come into, or essentially, why were you recruited to come in and run things?
Fair. So I've been active in the music industry, in the Canadian music industry specifically, for the better part of the last 10 years. I have dipped my toes in a variety of different different aspects of the industry. I've worked with collective concerts in promotion, and I've worked with arts and crafts. And so most recently, I was working with the fine folks at Six Shooter Records. So I was working with them on their artist management team, and predominantly working with their Indigenous roster. So I was working with Reet, and I worked with the Jerry Cans for a time, and I worked a
And
little bit with William Prince
blueprints, yeah.
and Tanya Tagak, of course. So I guess I started to make a name for myself in the Indigenous music community via being really the only Indigenous artist manager working with a Toronto-based company that, obviously has a fantastic track record of working with Indigenous artists and sort of
Mhm.
amplifying Indigenous artists. Um, so it seems as though that that caught people's attention. I have a longstanding relationship with the folks at CMI. I actually went through their artist entrepreneur management boot camp
Oh,
program that
nice. Cool.
yeah, that they started offering. Um, I think it was probably about 4 years ago that they rolled out
Hmm.
the artist entrepreneur program for both self-managed artists and artist managers.
Yeah.
So at the time, APTN had already been talking to Coalition and CMI basically about putting some money up to support Indigenous artists or artist managers who were interested in taking the course. But they obviously, APTN didn't have a direct line to any artist managers or Indigenous artists that may have been interested in the
Hmm.
program. So folks at Coalition and CMI reached out to me and said, you're sort of the prime candidate for this program, come and do it. And then through that program, I became more acquainted with the folks at APTN, and they filled me in on the fact that Coalition and APTN had been sort of dreaming and ideating what
Okay.
Red Rising would eventually be. And then 4 years later, it finally crystallized and came to fruition, and here
Hmm.
we are.
Now, see, I usually think of APTN as, well, a television production company and a news media company. Had it been involved in music before it partnered with Coalition Music?
So I mean, not in any real official industry capacity.
Hmm.
I'm APTN. I don't know exactly their involvement, but they had a hand in some of the Indigenous festival programming that happened in Winnipeg. I believe the Coalition and CMI came on board to sort of help with the Indigenous Day broadcasts and the live performances, and they were also on hand to provide mentorship and sort of resources, basically, for all of these Indigenous artists that were, well known in the Indigenous community,
Hmm.
but hadn't really had an opportunity to cross over, sort of cross pollinate with the rest of the Canadian music industry, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, their relationship goes back a little while, but APTN, so far as I know, hasn't really delved
Hmm.
into the music industry proper until now.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
The As far as like to really define what Red Music Rising is, like, you know, is it set up like a usual indie label, or more closer to what Coalition is, kind of an artist services company, some kind of combination to? Like, how do you define what Red Music Rising is and is here to do?
Fair. I think that we are still sort of discovering where our services are most needed. So we
Mm-hmm.
haven't. Uh, I mean, I'm in an incredibly privileged position to be able to sort of not decide what I'm going to be and what RMR is going to be from the outset, but to be able to engage folks in the community in dialogue and establish, who needs what and who wants to work in what capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really special thing about RMR right now, is that it's not set in stone, it's not defined.
Mm-hmm.
Our individual relationships can be defined by what capacity we're needed in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that said, I mean, we have the capabilities of a traditional management company. We also have label capabilities. So basically, we can operate as an indie label
Mm-hmm.
if those services are required of us. But I think it's really just going to be on an artist to artist basis, which is really exciting for me.
Yeah.
Just to be able to say, like, we can work together in whatever capacity you need, because I'm here to help you with whatever you need.
Mm-hmm. And again, I'm sure a lot of this is going to evolve over time, and there'll be a certain element of figuring it out as you go.
Absolutely. Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
But in terms of like, I guess what you could call the A&R part of it,
Mhm.
signing the artist or bringing the artist on board, like, kind of what's the criteria there? Of course, you're there to serve and develop Indigenous artists across, I believe, well, any genre. But like,
Yeah, absolutely.
beyond that, what do you envision as the type of artist you want to bring in, and how's that process going to play out?
Fair. Yeah, well, I mean, as you mentioned, we are genre agnostic. So really, my personal passion
Mhm.
is artist development. That's what I sort of
Mhm.
sought to do with my career from day one. So really, the criteria that we're looking for in terms of artists that we are looking to sign, either from a management or a labels perspective, I am looking to work with artists who are making contemporary, interesting, commercially viable music
Mhm.
that is, of course, always going to be. There will always be an element of indigeneity to these people's music,
Mhm.
to the artists' music, because that's who they are, intrinsically, inherently.
Yeah.
I'm also, however, here to sort of dispel the idea that Indigenous is a genre,
Mhm. Mhm.
because I personally don't know what that means. I don't know how you could sort of categorize an entire, young artists who are spanning genres and winning awards in different categories, et
Mhm.
cetera, et cetera. But to sort of have this catch-all term genre-wise and category-wise of Indigenous,
Yeah.
just it doesn't make sense to me anymore.
It's kind
So
of similar to, it's not a new conversation, but one that picked up steam over the last few months during the Black Lives Matter protests and movement, when it comes to this term urban amongst
exactly.
labels, and that, where it's like, it seemed to become like anything that was done by a black artist became urban, and it was a meaningless term. And
Absolutely. Yeah, it's sort of an archaic catch-all that
mhm. Mhm.
is it just isn't relevant anymore.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking with artists and enjoying artists, Indigenous artists who are making, the part of the shoegaze revival, and folks who are
Mhm.
making incredible dance music, and obviously there's lots of R&B and hip hop in the Indigenous community.
Yeah.
And then obviously you've got folks who are making traditional music, and also people who are taking traditional music and turning it into something contemporary like powwow step.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's no way to categorize all of that
Mhm.
by saying that it's Indigenous. So I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm here to work with artists whose music I love and art that I want to facilitate first, who happen to be Indigenous.
Interesting. Just to back up to some you said earlier when we were talking about kind of how to define, or is actually when we are talking more about the kind of the A&R part and what sort of artists you're bringing in and that. You said like commercially viable artists, which is also something like when you talk about factor grants, part of their criteria is commercially viable and that. And I'm always just interested, like, what does that mean per se? Like you look at someone like Jeremy Dutcher, who has, by contemporary commercial standards, has pretty odd music, but also certainly has found an audience,
Right.
and has been mega critically acclaimed, and what he does is amazing and beautiful. But it's
Mm-hmm.
just like, how do you determine what's, quote unquote, commercially viable per se?
I think, I mean, personally anyway, because I'm, again, privileged to sort of be in this position where I
Mm-hmm.
can, on an artist to artist and group to group basis, that's where the definition of commercially viable
Yeah.
comes from. I think that having, particularly as an artist manager, being able to have a one-on-one conversation, and obviously it becomes a dialogue because it's ongoing, but to be able to decide together when working with an artist what success looks like to them, like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
what they want to achieve, what success looks like to them, what success looks like to us, and therein lies sort of commercial viability.
Yeah.
I mean, I would love to be working with some folks who are chasing sort of whatever happens to be the most popular genre, quote unquote,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like top 40 mainstream radio accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if I find myself working with an artist whose definition of success isn't, a billboard in Times Square and is more critical acclaim, et cetera, then that's, that's the goal there as well.
Yeah. Like I always say, and as a magazine and such, we're always saying, like, if you're making a living off of music, if you're paying the bills from music, pat yourself on the back, you've made it. You know
Absolutely.
what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
It's like that's a hard enough thing to do. Well,
Yeah.
always has been, but
Yeah.
especially these days.
Yeah, I think there's also an aspect too of balancing. There's a balancing of culture when you're defining success as well. In terms of, I mean, being an Indigenous person
Mm-hmm.
who is working with Indigenous artists, like everyone full stop has a different view of what success looks like and what commercial viability looks like. And then there's an additional, there's a facet of culture and a facet of just, even just personal preference and personal taste when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to what success looks like and
Yeah.
definitions of viability.
So again, I'm kind of jumping all over the place here, but this sort of rewinds back to the formation of Red Music Rising. And then again, I know you weren't there when the initial conversations were held between Coalition and APTN and stuff. But like, what's the timeline of this as far as when did the initial ideas start developing up into the launch like a week or two
Yeah,
ago?
fair enough. So far as I've been told, story-wise, the conversation started probably about 6 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Oh
Um,
wow, okay.
yeah. So the conversations and the two parties came together to work on a variety of projects, other than Coalition and CMI working with APTN to assist with their Indigenous Day Live festivals and broadcasts. CMI was also involved, I believe, in doing some mentorship and both artist and industry mentorship for youth, like in a community in
Yeah.
Ontario, that APTN helped facilitate, just because they were the path in, and that's really where, I mean, the need for what Red Music Rising was to became apparent to both parties.
Mm-hmm.
And they just sort of came together and said, like, okay, well, what would this look like if there was, an Indigenous owned operated company that existed solely to help develop Indigenous artists, but also Indigenous industry members, and to serve as a space for mentorship that sort of exists with one foot in the traditional music industry, but one foot in the Indigenous music community in Canada.
Cool.
And then once the conversation started, when I was brought sort of to the table to ideate on this 4 years ago. Then as far as I'm concerned, it was full steam ahead 4 years ago, but there was a lot of, everyone had lots going on already. APTN obviously had lots going on, Coalition CMI, and then you start getting into like a partnership and creating new properties and a new company. So then lawyers become involved, and lawyers from different worlds are talking to one another. So I mean, it took a little while. But yeah, so far as I know, it was just lots of conversations over the course of the past 4 years, and then I came on board earlier this summer before the launch to just get conversations happening within the community and within the industry, and then right up to the launch a couple weeks ago.
It's a hell of a thing to have a 4-year buildup, only to have the launch coincide with a worldwide pandemic that shuts everything down.
Yeah, I'm choosing to look at it as it was a long time coming, and it only took a global pandemic for everyone to come together and crystallize.
What's been the effect of the current state of things on this launch? Are there pros and cons to it, or is it really just a pain in the ass?
I mean, there are certainly cons. I feel like there are absolutely cons. I'm sure that you can assume what they are. That being said, and maybe this is just hopefully this isn't rose-tinted glasses, and it's my actual perspective. I can't help but kind of feel as though I've been blessed with the extra time and resources that would ordinarily go into to festivals and routing tours, and just focusing so much energy, my own energy and artists' energy on live, namely because that's where people are driving a substantial amount of their income from, and it's awful that isn't available to us right now. But people are adapting. People have been adapting. To varying degrees of success, but it's just it's the reality that we now live with day to day. I personally, I feel as though this is actually a really great time to launch a brand new music company, because despite geographic location and inability to actually be in the same room with people, people have already adapted to this new normal and speaking on Zoom and doing business primarily on the phone or via email, which was already happening. But it's allowed me and the artists that I'm in conversation with to really focus on, okay, we don't have to rush a tour, we don't have to spend the entire summer playing festivals. Really, we can just collectively take this time to spend the energy and the resources that are available to us to focus on developing and to focus on planning. And obviously no one knows when live is going to become a thing again, whether it goes back to sort of what was normal, or some semblance of what was normal. But I think everyone's come to terms with that, and is just sort of realigned to, okay, now we've got this time to focus on making the best music that we can and figuring out what we want to do a year down the road, 2 years down the road. So yeah, I mean, again, it's a weird time to launch a company, but it's been good.
Yeah. I read the short Q&A you did with FYI Music News, last week or whenever it was, of course, around the launch of this. And when you were talking about kind of, again, going back to the motivation, inspiration for Red Music Rising, and you said part of it was the amount of incredible Indigenous talent that goes unnoticed and underserved by the mainstream Canadian music industry. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, like, what's at the root of that problem? Why has that been the case?
I mean,
I know there's a lot of elements to that.
Fair enough. Yeah, there are certainly a lot of elements at play, and it's really, on an artist to artist basis, it's it's entirely situational.
I know a lot of it's not pretty either, but
yeah. I mean, that's just that is a reality that we are living in.
Mhm.
I think that up until very recently, and I think that lots of folks in the industry are now only within the last few years, but are now sort of plugged into what's happening in the Indigenous music
Mhm.
community, what
Mhm.
has been happening. But that's still a really, historically speaking, that's a very recent development.
Yeah.
Um, the Jeremy's mention, and I keep harkening back to this, but Jeremy's mention of the Indigenous Renaissance when he
Mhm.
gave Juno acceptance speech. I think that things are coinciding in that the industry is becoming more aware, and with the proliferation of better internet and easier access to technology, folks, in communities, folks are making incredible music in their bedrooms on reserve, and they're able to share that with the world, to varying degrees, depending on what they're doing. Um, yeah, it's hard to say just definitively where the disconnect has been.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, as someone who has had my feet in both of these worlds for
Yeah.
some time, there up until fairly recently, and I mean, this isn't sort of definitive either, but there really hasn't been any conduit. There have been a few, definitely organizations here and there within the
Mhm.
last while, doing really great work and connecting with communities and Indigenous folks. But the bridges thus far have been very small between the two worlds, and that
Mhm.
there's only so much bandwidth these organized arts organizations have, and there's also there's an element of um, I don't want to say trust, but there's an element of um, there's a bit of insular activity within the Indigenous arts
Yeah.
community.
Uh,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's interesting, and you kind of made me think of something that I hadn't really thought about in this conversation before, which is, when we have kind of like as you're alluding to it, the dam has broken over the last few years in terms of Indigenous artists
Hmm.
reaching mainstream consciousness and reaching critical acclaim. And again, like you were also saying, there's no one Indigenous style of music. It's been across a huge array of genres. Like
Hmm.
even just look at major awards in the last few years and designations, like there's Tanya Takak, A Tribe Called Red, Slandinos, Res Kids, William Prince, Nahiwak, Iskway, Jeremy Detcher, Jeremy Cans, Midnight Shine, Digging Roots. I think I was actually just listening to David Strickland's Spirit of Hip Hop collaboration album, which is super cool. There has been this huge breaking of the dam in terms of Indigenous artists reaching the mainstream consciousness.
Hmm.
Does then that allow those artists to reach back to other young artists and bring them with them? Know what I mean? There's
Hmm.
always in music. There's always been, whether it's bringing young artists on tour with you to be your opening act, even name dropping them in interviews. This tradition through music of artists reaching back to help the next ones coming, just because they
Absolutely.
like them and like their music and that.
Hmm.
So now that we've had this kind of wave of Indigenous artists reaching acclaim and reaching mainstream consciousness,
Hmm.
on top of things like Red Music Rising and organizations and programs specifically designed to help develop these artists,
Hmm.
can we expect to see that this isn't like a blip on the radar, or in the timeline, that this is now the beginning of what will become the new norm for Indigenous music?
Absolutely. I mean, from where I stand and how I've been positioned in both in the industry and in the community, like this, this shows absolutely no sign of stopping anytime soon. And to your point about folks, reaching a certain point and being able to give back to their communities and to give folks a leg up, I mean, that's table stakes. That goes without saying. That's what you do.
Hmm.
That is what I'm trying to do on the industry side, because I think that we've seen this wave and the dam breaking, and of the contemporary Indigenous Renaissance that we find ourselves in artistically.
Hmm.
And what I'm trying to do, other than bolster and facilitate that even more, what I'm trying to do with RMR is to do that for the industry side of things, because there isn't as much industry representation as I would
Mm-hmm.
like to see, as there needs to be, because
Mm-hmm.
industry representation is vitally important, so that resources are distributed accordingly, etc. Um, so yeah, I mean that's yeah, reaching back and pulling people up, and hopefully once touring is a thing again, putting people on support slots, and continuing in that tradition, I think will continue, and we're only going to see more and more incredible Indigenous art just
Mm-hmm.
sort of explode at an exponential rate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's very much tied in. Like a couple weeks ago, I was talking with Aaron Lowers, who's one of the founding members of Advance, the new
Mhm.
Canadian Black music business collective, and their
Absolutely.
whole mission is all about representation on the industry business side of things too,
Yeah.
because of course, for going back decades and decades and decades, there's been countless amazing, influential, hugely popular Black artists, and yet on the industry side of things, it's white
Mhm.
managers, white label owners, white A&R, all that. So again, speaking specifically to the Indigenous artist experience,
Mhm.
what's the importance of there being, like yourself leading the way, Indigenous managers managing those
Mhm.
Indigenous artists, Indigenous agents, Indigenous, you know, label executives, even just Indigenous faces within these companies, and providing
Mhm.
perspective and saying like, actually, that that shit you're talking about, have you ever thought about it this way? Because what you're saying is kind of bullshit, or whatever it is. Know what I mean? Just having that voice in the room.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think primarily for Indigenous artists, um, I mean, in Canada, but also internationally, there's an element of cultural sensitivity, which isn't necessarily uh, on industry's radar. So that's sort of step one. There's already sort of an inherent level of comfort when working with someone who shares some of your experience.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that also, I mean, outside of an artistic perspective, like representation within the industry is that much more important and not even necessarily for artists, but just for Indigenous youth, as to be able to see representation at its very basest form, to be able to see someone who looks like you, or someone who has with which you share experience,
Hmm.
um, in a position of power, in a position of power that is then able to assist folks in the community, assist artists, and become sort of like again, sort of back to the conduit of mentorship and assistance from an industry side, but also representation of the Indigenous experience
Hmm.
on a youth side. I mean, really, just to be able to see people that look like you in positions of power, who have made it their career to be a manager, to run a label, to be an agent, and to know that's viable. Like you
Hmm.
can
Hmm.
you can do that, and there's a way to go about doing that, and there are resources available to you as a young Indigenous person, if this is something that interests you, and you would like to pursue music as a career outside of being an artist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is an important part of that going forward too. The long-term goal is making sure that especially on the professional side of things,
Hmm.
that Indigenous professionals don't become the Indigenous music guy. Know what I mean?
Exactly.
Indigenous managers aren't only managing Indigenous artists, and on and on like that. Indigenous producers aren't only producing Indigenous artists, that sort of thing. Normalizing that, so there's a true equality of opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Because up until I mean, really today, that's sort of the case within communities within the Indigenous music sphere. Like folks are working together, and they're doing incredible things, but it's only really when like some folks hook up with a white run label or
Hmm.
a white manager. Um, and it's just because the representation isn't there on the industry side. But also, to your point, like representation just within the industry as a whole, as opposed to sort of like the Indigenous music
Yeah,
industry,
yeah.
is vitally important. And I mean, that's hopefully that's what I've set out to do with
Hmm.
Arma, is just help proliferate the viability for Indigenous folks in the mainstream music industry, full stop, whether it's on the artist side or the professional side.
Cool. So, lastly, here before I let you go, just what's the blueprint moving forward in the near future, the coming weeks and months, in terms of what you guys have in the works and what you're working on?
Fair. I mean, that's a very good question. I think that in terms of next steps, we ideally within the next few weeks we'll have some really exciting artist partnership announcements
Mhm.
to make public. I mean, now that's the thing, is that I've been waiting uh, for months now for Red Music Rising to announce, and now that uh, we exist, I'm just chomping at the bit to get to work. And I know that I've been having these conversations over the past few months with a variety of artists who find themselves in the same place. Like they are just everybody's ready to get to work.
Mhm.
So we've got a variety of exciting things to talk about within the next little while.
Cool. And for Indigenous artists and professionals and aspiring professionals who want to learn more and maybe work with you guys or get involved, where do
Mhm.
they go for that? Who do they contact?
Well, we've got a website. Folks can take a look at redmusicrising.ca, all one word. And if especially folks that hear this, who are interested in reaching out about what it looks like to work professionally in the industry, or if we're always accepting demos and links, etc. We've got a submission page on our website. But yeah, and until then, stay tuned, and we'll have lots more to talk about.
Cool. Well, again, for everyone, Matt Maw, new head of Red Music Rising, and man, I've just really enjoyed this conversation. It's been fun doing this, and just again, big congrats on to you and everyone at involved at Coalition Music and APTN as well, to just making this happen and finally getting the launch going. And yeah, I wish you guys some huge, the best of luck and huge success with this. And I'm looking forward to chatting again.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. And yeah, hopefully we'll talk again soon.